Welcome to the Thursday Pivot. My name is Lori Power and I'm a group benefits specialist, and that means that I only do employee group benefits. They are intentionally designed, specifically put together for employees and their employers. And part of what we do in the after sales process is be consistently responsive. And it's because of being consistently responsive that we're in the room here today. My clients wanted to talk about SHifT. They didn't want to just talk about the little things that were constantly in the news. They wanted to talk about what business is going to look like after this pandemic. They wanted to talk about pivoting and moving forward. And part of that being consistently responsive is to bring people in the room who would know and be able to advise. And that brings us to my good friend, Frank Gannon. Frank is the president and founder of FTR Sales Consultants, which when I first met him, because he's a Ferrari nut, I thought that meant Ferrari, right? Ferrari time fast, right? So no, it's faster time to revenue. Frank's whole career has been centered on using systems and strategies to accelerate sales performance. Those who have the ability to identify opportunities and are dedicated to increasing their top line revenue to drive growth. So today he's going to take us through some of those items and help us move forward, because all boats float on a good tide. Frank, tell us a little bit about why you do this on a consulting basis and why you're not just working for ADP or working for one of these multinational huge companies.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. I appreciate the invite, and thank you for having me on today. Before I get into that, I have to apologize to Dawn because I've had conflicting meetings twice in a row for poor Dawn, and she probably hates me by now, and I'm going to apologize to her once more. So yes, so why not stay in the corporate world? So yeah, I spent most of my career at ADP Employer Services. This is a human capital management software as a service company, in case you don't know. And it was really a New York Stock Exchange sweetheart, Fortune 228, I think they are today. But I guess the story is this. I spent all this time at ADP, had a very successful career there, leaving as a VP of sales. And then I spent some time in some smaller organizations in Calgary, and I observed sort of the same pervasive challenges showing up time after time. And quite frankly, that was a lack of sales processes and systems. So the sales organizations had no structure and no way of really creating a science or some predictability around sales results. So having seen that in 3 organizations after ADP, I made the decision to move back home here to the capital region and start FTR Sales Consultants with the desire to help companies in the small to medium-sized market segment.
Because we all want to grow. Off air, we were talking a little bit, Frank, about being intentional in our process. And we were saying that now the opportunity is so great, is it, you know, that we can get together via Zoom and meet so many people. And I think Holly and I had mentioned last week that, you know, how far would you go to be in a room with 3 or 4 people that you could connect with, right? We used to spend a lot of time traveling to see those couple of people. Now here we are in the room. Take us through with Saudi Aramco when you first started working with them on how you help them streamline.
Yeah, you bet. So everyone here on the Zoom call obviously has heard of Saudi Aramco. This is the largest oil and gas producer on the planet at about 13 billion barrels a day. So I was telling this story to Lori vis-a-vis this whole Zoom experience, and I said, you know, 90% of the sales process that I led with Saudi Aramco, 90% of the sales process I led with Saudi Aramco was done using GoToMeeting, which is another tool like Zoom. You're probably all familiar with it. So 90% of that sales process over the course of 7 months was conducted via weekly meetings. And it was only one trip to Saudi Arabia, just to really put a bow on the deal was really all it took. So this whole notion.
Prior to them working with you, Frank,
Yeah.
what were their sales staff doing? Like just when you don't have those proper strategies and that focus for measuring and tracking, take us through what the sales process may have looked like prior to working with you and what it looked like thereafter.
Yeah, so pardon me. So let me provide a little bit more context. So the example of Saudi Aramco, so this was a prospect of mine prior to FTR. This is when I was the global VP of sales for an upstream oil and gas software company. So in terms of before using technology, Lori, you would have had people flying probably from Houston or Calgary multiple times over to Saudi Arabia to have these meetings face to face, and then flying back. And I don't know if any of you have flown over to the Middle East, but that's a 23-hour run each way, and you're exhausted when you get back. So you need 2 or 3 days, at least if you're my age, you need 2 to 3 days to recover.
Well, and and that's not necessarily to say closed business. That is, and I know Margaret can attest to this, we've talked lots. That is, how much time have you spent on the actual travel compared to actually being focused in the room with that potential client? And that really brings us to the sales strategies and the systems. I want to, with your permission, Frank, I want to launch the checklist, if we could, to get a general gauge on the room, if that works for everybody.
You bet.
I'm going to launch a poll. And if you can take a moment and just read them, I'll read them out for you, and then just say, what do you do as a company? This is your sales thermometer. We have a sales revenue target that is linked to our company's year-over-year target. We use a CRM system to track the sales activity. We measure. You can't track what you don't measure. We have a value statement that clearly articulates our key differentiators. We have defined sales processes. Our sales associates have sales and revenue targets, so people are all on the same page. Our sales associates are a no pay for performance compensation model, means if they're not performing, are you still paying them? We have clearly defined our sales activity matrix. We track our sales. Again, you can't measure what you don't track. We have a monthly sales forecasting model, and we have structured weekly meetings to inspect the robustness of our sales funnel, to hold our salespeople accountable to best practices. So if you can take a moment and share what you do best in your company, things that apply to you, that would be great. And that's going to open us up to really hammer with Frank these most proven strategies for success. Okay, 3 of you have given answers. Come on. It doesn't close until everybody gives an answer. Okay, we got 4. We got quite a few more to go. 5. There you go. You guys really needed a kick in the hump today. It must be raining where you are. 7. Or close. All right. So let's share this out. Everybody see that if we have it up on the screen? Everybody can see.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at about 50% for almost everything until we get down to the daily activity and the sales forecasting. Walk us through, first off, number 1 on your list, Frank. We have sales revenue targets. Why is
Yeah,
that important?
yeah, for sure. That's important in that, initially assigning the revenue targets. How do you go about assigning the revenue targets if you don't know what the year-on-year growth strategy is from a revenue perspective? So I like to ensure that there is a direct linkage. So if a company says they want to grow by X million year on year, you need to reverse engineer that number downward, right down to assigning revenue targets for the salespeople. And then further on, reverse engineering that down to the number of net new face-to-faces salespeople need to have with prospective clients, down to the number of prospecting calls, the number of networking events, et cetera, so that there's an end-to-end process, for lack of a better term, that really leads up to achieving the individual quotas and then the broader growth target.
Well, and that would lead us into a tracking measurement tool like a customer management system. So what do we do? Holly and I have a colleague who says, it's all up here, man. I just know month over month what I'm doing. I just relate that to my staff and I know when we've hit it. What do you say to that?
Well, that scares me, to be honest.
It scared us too.
And the reason that I ask this question is because often what I see in the market places is pervasive challenges. Customers or my clients have purchased a CRM system, but they're really not optimizing the tool. Something like a Salesforce.com is not cheap. So that's why I asked this question. So it's good to have, it's okay to have the tool, but if you're not optimizing it in terms of tracking that activity, what I call those leading indicators of success, so the number of face-to-face meetings, the number of prospecting calls, et cetera, if you're not tracking those, what are you covering at your sales meeting every Friday morning or every Monday morning? So you should be tracking those in the CRM, putting them up in the screen in the boardroom with the salespeople present, and having them step the business through their activity for the week. In terms of your colleague, it scares me because the CRM is not only for tracking activity, but most of them do a pretty darn good job of forecasting. So one of the things that I implement with my clients is a regular forecasting cadence where we leverage the CRM to forecast a month out in advance and then give a view to the business of month 2 and 3. So here's our forecast for July, and here's what we're thinking for August and September. It's all really about giving the senior leaders and the CEOs a level of comfort that revenue is coming into the fort, for lack of a better term. And then thirdly, I would say, you always want to know what a customer has or does not have. So if you have a multiple service offering, so take payroll, for example. If you know that a customer has ADP payroll, and you know that a customer has ADP HR software, you know where to direct your efforts. So if you know they have payroll and HR and they don't have time and labor management, you can then market to that particular customer for time and labor management or pre-employment screening or the like.
Well, and I do think sometimes people shy away from perhaps setting up a CRM because it takes some time to input the information. Once you have it, ongoing information. Gavin and I were talking about this on Monday. Part of my system measures where income is coming from, so I can track that cash conversion cycle, right? The time from first meeting, all of the steps in between until they become an in-force client of ours, and then moving forward. By tracking that, it doesn't look like anything to start off with, but it's like a mushroom cloud, in my opinion. So now I can actually see where and what kind of benefits my clients mostly go for. It allows me to see what benefits to ask them for, because I wasn't seeing that in my head, right? And though that's what takes you out of your head, to be able to see it on paper, graph it out. When we're now going to be upselling or increasing our sales or looking at who would be our potential client, that leads us into our value statement. And how important is that in working with everything else that you have going on?
Yeah, you bet. And just to quickly close off on the previous point, we should all be in the mindset with our existing customers of going deeper and wider with additional products or services. Why? To drive additional revenue from our customer base, but also to create entry barriers for competitors. So that's why the CRM usage is also important. I think the value statement is probably the biggest thing, because really what the value statement focuses on is taking your company out of this notion of value parity with a competitor and establishing value differentiation. So how is your client different? How is your company different than your competitors? So the value statement allows you to really dig in, flip chart it in a boardroom environment and really come up with those KDFs, or those key differentiating factors that create that value differentiation that you can then craft your value statement around that. So that's really one of the first places I start with every single one of my customers, because one of the largest challenges with sales is gaining access to a decision maker. So we need to be very, very crisp on our value statement, so that when we're prospecting into the C-suite person in a company, we can clearly articulate what makes our company different, so that we can gain that first meeting.
Well, I remember the day Frank years ago, where they would say, you have to make an impression in the first 60 seconds. And I think by today's schedule is, you have about 15 seconds now to really show people what makes you different and see if they're going to stick around in this virtual environment.
Yeah, you bet, because I mean, I've been in several senior leader positions, and I've been prospected all day long at my last corporate job. And you probably all agree on the phone, you're listening for those, those key differentiating factors. And if they're not there, you want to hang up the phone as soon as humanly possible.
And are all salespeople created equally? So let's go back to the one organization, and they have a sales force in place. They are all very clear on their messaging. They're tracking what they're doing. Are they approaching things the same? How do we organize our salespeople to represent us?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. I mean, every salesperson has their own strengths and weaknesses, which really leads me to the importance of, when I think about my clients, I think about being involved in their hiring process, because it's one of the things that we haven't talked about here today. So I'm heavily involved in their hiring process, then being as scientific as possible around that process with behavioral interviewing type questions, as well as including an assessment tool like the PI tool, a predictive indicator tool that one of our mutual colleagues offers. With the PI tool, that allows you to better identify the type of salesperson they are, and then how you could lead and manage and coach them on an ongoing basis.
Well, we were talking yesterday amongst different colleagues, and I think Gavin and I think we've talked about this as well, how companies are coming together in this post-pandemic world of ours to survive. So you have some companies that are now amalgamating in order to create that survival tool of coming together. And I've noticed some very unique companies coming together. So this ties into both the sales and that predictive index. I have seen a marketing company pair up with a construction company. It just seems like the duck and the ostrich. I'm just like, how is that working? And it works because they have the sales processes and tools in place. They know their leadership skills. How do you work with companies that are coming together in that manner? And how do we know what to do to make sure everybody is on the same page?
Well, I haven't had that direct experience in the current COVID, or as we move outside of COVID. So it's a little bit of a loaded question, but I would answer it
It's
by
a hot seat, Frank.
yeah, a loaded question. But again, I would reflect on being as scientific as humanly possible, and I would be using a tool like the predictive index to really get an understanding of who's who in the zoo, and really what their strengths are. And I'll relate a story to everybody. So back at ADP, and the reason that I know of this tool is back at ADP, we had everybody complete this assessment. And as a VP at ADP, I was coached and instructed to have your top performers complete this assessment, and then that will give you a blueprint of the types of people that you want to hire in the future. So I mean, that was a huge differentiator for me as I built out several successful sales teams by using that tool. So I would just say short answer is apply as much science to things as possible, whether it's a single company or two single companies coming together and merging those strengths.
Can I ask a question about the PI tools? Sorry to interrupt. And I'm sorry, I've got to run it too. I wanted to just pop in and say hi though, Lori. Thanks for the invite. But on the PI index, and I work in a similar capacity to Lori. We work in the same industry, and mental health is such a huge issue, and there aren't a lot of great solutions and not a lot of good answers. And even as recently as 2 weeks ago, I had a client who hired somebody. They got through the 3-month waiting period, and then their second day after that, off on mental illness sick leave. And so, and that may be a bit of an extreme example, but we're seeing more and more of this. Is we can't really deny. And if we ask some of our carriers out there, there's just not a lot of good solutions out there that we can. This isn't a buy this and it'll go away type of issue. So I was curious. I just haven't heard much about the PI type of programming. That is this something where that could be used to identify whether someone has the emotional intelligence or the resilience that, let's say, a high stress job like a salesperson might need, versus someone who works on straight salary. Maybe there's more financial security, in a fully commissioned sales environment. You need someone who is tough and resilient. And does the PI index go to those places?
Yeah, so it certainly does, in terms of how somebody would handle a high stress environment like a sales role, quota carrying sales role. You bet. It really identifies those key behaviors and traits that you want to have as repeatable in future hires. But yes, you bet it does. I'll tell you that if I engage a tool such as the PI, I do it through a third party and then bring those people in to a client. So we have a colleague that actually sells this software solution as well as other services, and I would typically bring her in. She would run the process through.
But we see you, Frank, as somebody to quarterback the entire motion to make sure that people are meeting those sales goals and continuing on that process. So much like you and I, Gavin, who work with specialists to create that stickiness with the client, that's the way he does it on the sales force on the revenue side to meet them. Lynn, as I'm tripping over my words, Lynn has a question.
You weren't tripping at all, Laura. You were skipping elegantly over the words, and we do it all. I'm sitting here with wet hair in Toronto. I am not going to judge anybody on anything today. Frank, thanks so much for taking the time. I'm really interested to know, as because you've been a very successful sales executive and transferring now into a very successful for business owner and consultant. But in talking to other sales and in leading other sales teams, what I'm finding is people who seem to understand how to integrate networking with their prospecting change the kind of conversation right from the get-go, and they start that value differentiation right away. Because if you're going to bring value to me through a networking mindset, it's a help mindset versus a how can I sell you something mindset. It's a value bringing versus what can I sell you. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, coming from ADP, I come from an environment where you prospect hard, you get a meeting with the C-suite, and you pull them through your 6-step sales process. However, I have since shifted. Excuse the pun, Lori.
I love it.
Shifted to taking more of a multi-pronged approach. So prospecting using tools like LinkedIn, networking, business groups, etc. So my view is that we must take a multi-pronged approach, because there's no one best approach. And to your point, you really got to be crisp in articulating that value statement, like up front in that first 30 seconds in a networking environment. Otherwise, people's eyes just gloss over and they want to run.
And as we come to time here, Frank, I remember this was one of our first conversations that we had. And the reason why my value statement, as I introduced myself, when I'm not tripping over myself, is so much more clear and concise, is because Frank coached me through how to make what makes me different. Why do I do what I do? What is the passion for that? Frank, what is the one takeaway that you would like everybody in the room to be able to start applying today to get to that FTR, that faster time to revenue?
Yeah, I would really boil it down to, and this coming from a sales executive, this may sound odd, but it really starts with identifying, going through that exercise of what makes you different. What are your key differentiating factors that are unique, firstly, unique to your company, important to your clients, and then defensible with data. So if you say, I have a 98% client retention rate, you need to be able to defend that with data. So I would say starting with that exercise is absolutely massive, because it lays the foundation to, in my view, creating that value statement and giving you the ability to have those meaningful conversations with decision makers, whether it be prospecting cold or in a networking environment.
Well, thanks so much for everybody coming out today. I am always concerned about time and your return on investment. So I hope if you've liked it that you'll come back again. It's all because I really like the networking. I get a lot of energy from the people in the room. I hope if you liked it, you might bring back a friend, contact Frank. Please do pick somebody out of the chat bar and connect with them. Make it worth your while by having a virtual coffee. It costs you nothing and gains you everything. In next week, we are going to have Jonathan Gallo from Gallo and Company, who's going to be talking about what's what in accounting. Let's not forget the tsunami of tax season coming up on us out of normal in September. It's going to be important for us to be prepared. If you know people who can benefit from that, please, I hope you will give them the Thursday Pivot contact information so that they can come on board. And Dawn, it is so great to have you here. Dawn is a specialty writer, a PhD, and she's going to be on the show in the next little while to talk us through, to Frank's point, everything that we talk about needs to be communicated effectively, and there is power in that written word. So again, I thank everybody for coming out today. This is my virtual handshake to you, and I look forward to the day that we can shake in person. Thanks again.